In this SY2 Mass Media screencast, I'm going to try and give you some advice to help you to decode examination questions by looking at the main types of questions that examiners tend to ask. Now, one of the things that's really important when you're doing your revision is to base your revision around some of the most common types of questions that come up within the exam. And very broadly speaking, there are 5 main types of questions that examiners tend to ask on the sociology of the mass media. So firstly, you get questions about the news media, specifically about the social construction of the news. And in order to answer this question, you need to be able to evaluate the influence of owners, advertisers, media professionals, organisational constraints and technological changes on the production of the news. And what I mean by technological changes in this particular context are things like the development of Web 2.0 and wireless communication devices that have led to the phenomenon of citizen journalism. And here are a couple of examples of past exam questions specifically on the topic of the news media. And one thing to draw your attention to with both of these questions is the importance of learning the definitions of key concepts thoroughly when you're doing your revision. So the key concept in this question is the idea of moral panics, and in this question you need to look at news values. So obviously if you haven't learned the definitions of key terms thoroughly as part of your revision, you might be faced with an exam question that you don't understand because you haven't learned the definitions. The second type of question that comes up on the mass media section of SY2 are questions about the representation of social groups. Now, by social groups, we could be looking at an exam question about gender, we could be looking at an exam question about media representations of different social classes, we could be looking at ethnicity, we could be looking at issues to do with disability, sexuality and age. So obviously read the question very carefully to make sure that you're using the right material. And when you're discussing the way in which social groups are represented in the mass media, often you'll need to talk about both the underrepresentation of particular groups within the media and the misrepresentation of social groups through things like negative stereotyping. And make sure that you can discuss the extent to which traditional stereotypes of social groups are still prevalent within the mass media, or whether or not there have been significant changes to stereotypes in recent years. And here are 3 examples of past exam questions on this topic of media representations. And notice with these examples the focus is on gender, so males and females, gender stereotypes, reference to gender again. And if the question talks about gender, then you can talk about both representations of women and men. It doesn't necessarily mean, though, that the question on representation will always be about gender. Okay, these are just some examples. It could equally be the case that the questions that you're faced with in the summer exam might be questions about stereotypes relating to class, ethnicity, disability, sexuality or age. The third type of question that comes up regularly on the media section is this question about who controls the media. Is it the media owners? Is it media professionals like journalists and editors? Or is it ultimately us, the media audience? And really this debate needs to be closely linked to theoretical perspectives. So we've got the traditional Marxist perspective that stresses the importance of media owners like Rupert Murdoch, who are seen as having direct or operational control over their media businesses. Then we've got the neo-Marxist perspective. This argues that the control of the mass media by owners is more indirect and therefore puts more emphasis on the role of media professionals in controlling the day-to-day output of the mass media. And then finally, in opposition to Marxist perspectives, we've got the pluralist approach that argues that audiences ultimately control the content of the mass media. And in relation to this debate, David Gauntlet argues that the development of digital technologies presents a potentially radical shift in who controls information, experiences and resources. So whereas the old media content was under the vertical control of media corporations, new media content, so user-generated content that we associate with Web 2.0, is much more under the control of its participants and audience. And here are a couple of examples of past exam questions on this particular topic area. And if we look at the first question, discuss the view that owners control the content of the media, it's quite likely that you might get a similar question in the exam, but the emphasis might be different. It might be discuss the view that audiences control the content of the media, or that media professionals control the content of the media. And for each of these essay types, you'd be using exactly the same material, but obviously the order in which you might present the arguments would be different depending on the emphasis in the question. The fourth type of question that regularly comes up is this one. How does the media affect audiences? What kind of impact does the mass media have on its audience? And in order to do a good answer for this type of question, it's essential that you learn the following theoretical models: the hypodermic syringe model, the two-step flow model, the cultural effects model, and then the uses and gratifications model and the decoding model. And I think theoretical models like the hypodermic syringe model and the cultural effects model can be linked to the idea that the media can act as an agency of social control, and from a Marxist perspective as a source of ideological power, whereas in contrast the more active audience models like the uses and gratifications model and the decoding model can be linked more explicitly to pluralist perspectives on the media. And here are some questions about this particular topic, about the impact that the media has on audiences. And with this last question, this idea that the media acts as an agency for social control, you could answer that question by focusing on perspectives like Marxism that would argue that through ideology the media controls the masses. You could also bring in feminist perspectives and look at how media messages might control women within a patriarchal society, and you could use pluralism to challenge these types of perspectives. The fifth and final type of question that might come up on the media exam would be a question about the changing role of the mass media. And here the emphasis could be on changing patterns of media ownership, and the key concept really in relation to patterns of ownership is this idea of media concentration. Or the emphasis of the question might be on technological changes to the mass media, so the rise of the so-called new media associated with the internet and wireless communications, and also ideas connected to the globalization of the mass media and changing patterns of media consumption, so the fact that we spend so much of our lives now looking at screens in a culture which is saturated with images and messages from the mass media. And here are some examples of questions about the changing role of the mass media. So I hope that this screencast has given you a bit more confidence in decoding questions and has maybe made the exam seem a little bit less scary. Do bear in mind though that we don't know what the questions are going to be in the summer exam, and it may be that you get a different type of question that doesn't fit neatly into the categories that I've given you. Just stay calm, think about the question carefully, do a plan, and think about what knowledge you have that is the most relevant to help you answer the question that is set. So please read the question carefully and build in some thinking and planning time before you start writing. Remember, you can find lots of material to help you revise for the media section of the SY2 exam if you go onto iLearn and you click on this particular button. So within this section of iLearn, you'll find lots of information about how to structure answers. You'll find a comprehensive glossary of key terms, and you'll find lots and lots of model answers.